Ancient Egypt. One of the most fascinating civilizations on Earth. But what was it like to be an ancient Egyptian, living in this incredible place? It's okay trying to understand ancient Egypt on a visual level, pyramids, king tut, mummies, but to really get into the heads of the ancient Egyptians, you've got to walk in their footsteps. I'm Egyptologist Dr. Joanne Fletcher, and I've spent over 40 years obsessed with this lost world. While the magnificent temples and tombs of the pharaohs can tell us one story, I'm interested in another, the story of ordinary people, the real Egyptians. It's such a privilege. We're amongst their family here. This feeling of closeness, of warmth, of love. I'm going to uncover evidence about how they lived their lives. Oh, wow. It's a glimpse into the sort of world of ancient Egyptian interior design and reveal what they hoped for in death. There was no Grim Reaper, just this beautiful goddess wanting to embrace them in her warm arms. And there is one very special couple I want to get to know as I journey to their desert village home and examine the treasures from their tomb. You can only imagine his pride and joy at receiving such a mark of royal favour as we discover what life was really like in ancient Egypt. Welcome to Deir el Medina, or as the people who used to live here 3,500 years ago used to call it, Pardemi, which simply means the village. Today this village feels remote and inhospitable. But 3,500 years ago, this community lay at the heart of ancient Egypt. Situated on Luxor's west bank, it was a suburb of Egypt's great city, Thebes. Now this is the landscape of kings and gods, pharaohs, and yet these are the homes of ordinary people living ordinary lives. Men and women, aunts and uncles, grandparents and kids, they all lived here in this tightly packed community. And by reimagining how people lived, in the colours, the sounds, the smells, we have an instant gateway right back 3,500 years to these ancient people who lived here in this remote little village in the desert. Now, in order to piece together the lives of such people, I've got an amazing set of clues. The earthly remains of a husband and wife who once lived in the village, but now reside nearly 2,000 miles away, here at the Egyptian Museum in Turin. Meet Ka and Merit. Ka the architect, Merit his wife. Now Ka and Merit were two of the sort of leading lights of the village. Ka's actual title was the Chief of Foremen, so he was in charge of the workforce. And Merit, her official title was Lady of the House, which is ancient Egyptian for housewife. This is the only known statue of Ka. Almost certainly an idealised image, it nonetheless suggests a proud and rather handsome man. And this death mask is one of the few representations we have of Merit, which reveals a soft and very beautiful face. And although these mummies have never been unwrapped, what lies beneath has been revealed by X-rays and CT scans. We know that Carr, who stood about 5'6", was a very striking-looking individual with a rather prominent nose and a great fondness for lots of black eyeliner. But then when we turn to his diminutive little wife, Merritt, a very dainty little lady, standing about 5'2". She also had a long, crimped wig of dark brown, wavy hair, which would have made her look really, really beautiful. But what really brings Cara Merritt back to life is this. The collection of objects discovered in their intact tomb in 1906, where they had lain undisturbed for over 3,000 years. A leading Egyptologist from the time wrote,
"I should think it is the greatest find ever made, or rather, the most unique. Absolutely intact and full of antiquities. The passage and burial chamber are choked with chairs, beds, boxes, vases." Arthur Weigel, 2 p.m, 15th February 1906.
This is really a unique find because of its intactness, but also because of the wealth of material that was in the tomb. Tables and chairs and stools and more chairs and more coffers, and the coffers packed with linen and the coffers packed with cosmetic vessels. And his shaving equipment packed into a little leather pouch, and his hip flask, and everything is there. Even the shaped breads wrapped with palm fronds to keep them fresh. It is really incredible. There is material there for research for another few generations.
The collection not only gives us a fascinating insight into their burial, but also the lives Cara Merritt lived. The finds ranging from death masks and coffins to their most intimate belongings used in life, like this, Merritt's beauty box. This is basically the contents of Merritt's dressing table. The perfume, cosmetics, moisturisers and all the things that the ancient Egyptians regarded as so essential. Well used and well loved, this stunning cosmetic chest tells us Merritt was a well-to-do woman who cared about her appearance. This is Merritt's glass black coal eyeliner. Glass was very rare at this time, and it's in the classic Egyptian colour combination of blue and gold. And the black eye paint that Merritt herself applied every day to her own eyes is still inside this vessel. It's got its wooden applicator stick in the top, and Egyptian ladies today still use this in exactly the same way. This stone alabaster perfume vessel still got the original contents running down the outside. And it's extraordinary to think that in some cases with the ancient Egyptians, it's not just a question of the visuals. It's how to reach back in time into their world through other senses, the sense of smell, for instance, and to be able to smell the things they smelt, the cinnamon, the lotus, the cedar. Clearly this is an expensive item. So how would a fairly ordinary Egyptian like Merritt afford such luxury? The answer lies in the village and the very special occupation of its inhabitants. For these were Egypt's tomb and temple builders. From the foreman to the stonemason, from the draftsman to the carpenter, and they all lived here with their wives and children. And about a mile to the northwest is where they worked, the most famous cemetery on earth. This is the great and majestic necropolis of the millions of years of pharaoh life, prosperity and health in the west of Thebes, or as we know it today, the Valley of the Kings. For nearly 500 years, men like Ka created the tombs of some of Egypt's most famous pharaohs. Hatshepsut, Amenhotep III and Tutankhamun were all buried here. They were an elite, a kind of crack force of workmen and architects, the very best of the Egyptian culture. They were the craftsmen that implemented what Pharaoh wanted to sustain Pharaoh's soul for eternity. They were almost magicians, operating secretly within this stunning landscape. But I'm getting ahead of myself, as the life story of Ka and Merit begins back in the village. Here I want to explore how they may have met and fallen in love. They probably grew up in the village, but how did a young couple like them go about courting? To find out, I don't have to go very far, as here on the outskirts of the village is the Great Pit. It's a long-abandoned attempt by the villagers to find a groundwater source. They dug down and eventually reached more than 50 metres. They wanted to become self-sufficient in water, but sadly for them they never did. And yet what the pit did become was a community dump. It became a mine of information. As when this pit and its surroundings were excavated by archaeologists, they made some remarkable discoveries. And this is what was found here. Literally tens of thousands of these pieces of pottery and stone, some with pictures, many more with words, giving us the real history of the village, because these are their notes, their reminders, their love songs, their laundry lists, the very voices of this village. And some of these voices tell us about falling in love.
Your hand is in my hand. My body shakes with joy. My heart is so happy because we walk together. To hear your voice is like pomegranate wine.
This is a typical love poem, written on papyrus as well as stone or pottery fragments. They capture the feelings of young lovers. They're so common, it seems our village was a real hotbed of passion. Every single one of the love poems from ancient Egypt come from this village except one. Some of the titles are really evocative. There's Your Love, Down to the River, All Night and All Day, and the rather suggestive Shedding Clothes.
I go down to the water to be with you, and come up again with a red fish looking splendid on my fingers. Oh, my warrior, my beloved, come, look at me.
And it's nice to imagine that such beautiful lines of love played a part in the courtship of Ka and Merit. Today we might seal the deal with a proposal, engagement and marriage, but some ancient Egyptians seem to have taken a rather more direct approach. Ka may well have signalled his commitment to Merit by bringing her his bundle. To bring the bundle meant you wanted to indicate your desire to move in with the person who took your fancy. The bundle is thought to have been a kind of dowry, consisting of everything the man owned. It's likely that presenting it to your intended was one of the first steps to setting up home together. However, this didn't always go to plan, as one villager recounts. In a note the man left, he tells us this very sad story. He lists all his worldly goods, which I must say aren't that impressive. Then he tells us he went to the woman's house, but all her family simply threw him out. And as he says himself, so I went again with all my property in order to live with them, and see, she acted in exactly the same way and threw me out again. You can almost feel his outrage, because this woman has not just turned him down, but all the things he could bring with him. Presumably she was unimpressed by the size of his bundle. We can assume Ka suffered no such indignity, as evidence from the tomb suggests that he and Merritt were a loving and monogamous couple. The scenes on this beautiful box show Car and Merritt seated together to share the offerings which will sustain them in the afterlife. But in life too, we also have clues to their devotion. Now, although the ancient Egyptians didn't have a marriage ceremony as we would understand it, they simply moved in together, they nevertheless would exchange love tokens, quite often in the form of rings. This ring was discovered underneath the death mask of Merritt. It's so precious, it's not yet on display here in Turin.
This is the ring that was found inside the mask, almost as an afterthought of Merritt. So it was shoved in there just as she was being buried.
It spent all those thousands of years just tucked away, hidden away, yes, within Merritt's own wrappings. A very ad hoc thing, wasn't it? Yes. A very spontaneous gesture, yes, almost. Yes. And the image on it, it looks like the cow of Hathor.
That's exactly what it is.
The goddess Hathor was often depicted as a cow. She was seen as the eternal mother figure to both the living and the dead. In life, she aided fertility and provided protection in childbirth. While in death, she ensured safe passage into the afterlife. This represents the love between Car and Merritt, and in this tiny little object, in some ways, it's perhaps the most important thing from the entire tomb for me personally. It's wonderful. Car and Merritt lived in a glittering age in Egyptian history. Sustained by the annual floods of the River Nile, the Egyptian state had existed for almost 2,000 years. By 1400 BC, it was at the height of its power and now ruled by the 18th royal dynasty. Its kings are among the greatest names of ancient Egypt. We have the so-called boy king, Tutankhamun, the great female pharaoh, Hatshepsut, and the so-called bad boy, the heretic, Akhenaten. But really, at the very heart of all this is Akhenaten's father, this man, Amenhotep III, the dazzling sun god himself, and the very personification, at least he thought, of ancient Egypt's greatest deity, the sun. He's my favourite pharaoh because he presided over a golden age when ancient Egypt really did rule the ancient world. And this is the very pharaoh who was Car's boss. Car worked for him. Car's job was to ensure the pharaoh's immortality. He did this by helping design and build some of Egypt's most extraordinary monuments, both tombs and temples. This is one such project from the reign of Amenhotep III. The Solar Court in Luxor Temple. It's a revolutionary design as it moved away from the dark and cloistered shrine to an open celebration of the sun. In return, like all state employees, Car and Merritt were given the things they needed in the village. A home, a tomb, food, water, even servants. This was the highly organised world of the middle classes. Women had rights, many kids an education, and literacy was far higher in the village than elsewhere in Egypt. In Car and Merritt's time, the village consisted of about 20 houses. And while we don't know exactly which one was their house, it was almost certainly one of the larger ones, here at the northern end. Perhaps even this one. So, we go into the front room here. And this would be an area really where the sort of women of the house hung out, chatted, gossiped and so forth. Kids running in and out up the stairs. Around the corner into the perhaps most important room in the house. And here, I absolutely love this. This is built-in furniture. It's kind of like a divan, a chaise longue, if you like. And this is where the gentlemen of the house would sit of an evening, drinking beer, having a chat. Then back up here, up this little step, and then into this area, which is quite a considerable size for a room like this, and probably storage, but also a bedroom where the beds or the sleeping mats would have been placed. So as we progress a little further into the highest part of the house, we come into a storage area, maybe for clothes, but almost certainly for food and drink also, because this area directly adjoins this wonderful fitted kitchen. And this is extraordinary because we've actually got the built-in oven at the back of the house. We even see these on the Ostraca when they're doing little sketches of ladies blowing into the oven to keep the fire hot, and then they can cook the bread and so forth. And then here, ancient Egyptian refrigerator, where you'd place pottery vessels with drink in. You'd want a cool drink on a day like this, you can understand why. And the only way to do this was to sink the vessels into a pit deeper in the ground. Little tiny temporary roof over it to keep it as chilled as possible. So, fridge, oven, they've got everything they needed. And of course, at either side aren't rooms of this house, but these are the neighbours' houses. These are a terrace street, if you like, of back-to-back houses of the sort Britain had in the Industrial Revolution. So the neighbours were never very far away, and the concept of privacy, certainly in this little corner of ancient Egypt, was a completely unknown thing. Life in the village was almost entirely supported by the state. A daily procession of donkeys would carry water up from the Nile Valley to be decanted into a central cistern. Each household was entitled to an average of 100 litres per day for drinking, cooking and bathing. Less than half a mile from the village lies another crucial remnant of this highly organised infrastructure. Although built a little after Car's time, grain stores like these acted as a kind of bank. Money didn't exist in Egypt at this time, so at the end of each month, Car would have received his salary as a ration of wheat and barley. Granaries like this would have held an immense amount of food. These granaries alone would have held over 40,000 individual sacks of grain. Chief workmen like Car were entitled to 7.5 sacks of grain a month, 5.5 of emmer wheat and 2 of barley. Plenty for Merit and their servants to produce the staples of Egyptian life, bread and beer. The villagers also received fish and vegetables and could trade their excess grain for luxuries like meat and wine. These places would have been full of life. People bustling here and there, scribes taking record, making an account of all the stuff being delivered. A constant stream of men carrying sacks, depositing them here, people coming to collect their rations. It's a simple system, but one that endured, fueling Egypt's success and political stability for thousands of years. Indeed, it was a system so important it was represented on numerous tomb walls. These scenes are from the tomb of the scribe Menna, contemporary with Car himself. Here we can see the whole process of the wheat and barley being harvested and distributed. And here the principal food it produced, bread. Car and Merit had no less than 50 loaves of bread in their tomb. Now bread was the key ingredient in the ancient Egyptian diet. The ancient Egyptians added many different things to it. You could add dates or honey to make it sweet, or savoury things, cumin seeds, coriander seeds, all manner of different ingredients to really vary it. And in the tomb there's a whole range of different sizes and shapes, including what appear to be gingerbread men, little shapes of fruit, flowers and animals.
Although they didn't have yeast as such, the technique of combining flour, water and salt to make bread is virtually unchanged in 3,500 years.
I mean, this is a completely timeless scene. This fabulous mud brick oven is typical of the ovens we find in ancient Egyptian settlements. It's totally believable to imagine Merit baking bread to feed her family. It's a completely timeless scene. How was it? It's a real direct link back into their world. The smell of this wonderful stuff, the feel of it, the way it was made. All Egyptians would have eaten this on a daily basis. It was the sort of stuff that you offered to the gods.
And even when the bread had gone mouldy, the Egyptians used it as a form of medicine, which wouldn't be fully understood for thousands of years.
The medical texts actually advocate take bread in mouldy condition and apply to the wound in question. And although they didn't know why it did work, because mouldy bread contains, of course, penicillin, which we in the West think we discovered, and yet the ancient Egyptians fully appreciated its benefits 5,000 years ago. It's very good stuff.
While Merit's responsibilities were largely focused on life at home, Ka's duties were dominated by working for the pharaoh. He and his fellow tomb builders took this path from the village to their workplace, the Valley of the Kings.
It starts here at the southern end of the village, and then it follows that path there, see, right up over that col, and then we go straight up and over the top of the mountain.
Ka and his workforce would have regularly made this journey, sometimes camping out during the working week in small huts in the valley.
In Ka's day, we were probably about 40 to 60 men making this journey, probably singing, probably carrying water pots themselves, and the day's rations maybe.
Ka must have walked this path hundreds of times, first perhaps as a carpenter, but eventually as the royal architect and overseer.
So if we've been walking about 45 minutes in full sun and it's really, really hot, then Ka and his men coming up this path to work, they do the walk and then they had to do the work.
Exactly.
Their regular commute took them further west into the land of the dead. In fact, from up here, you can see why this place was so carefully chosen, as it mirrors the ancient Egyptian spiritual beliefs.
If you worship the sun as a god, then 2 times of the day take on special significance. Sunrise in the east and sunset in the west. Sunrise is the birth of the god, so the east is the land of the living. Sunset is the death of the god, so the west is the land of death. So they picked this spot to make the tombs for the dead.
This one spot, life, death. The Nile Valley, the Valley of the Kings. And it is that stark, isn't it?
It is.
Continuing our hike, we finally reach the western branch of the Valley of the Kings, where time has virtually stood still. Remnants of the tomb builder's world litter the landscape.
This is a great staircase.
It's superb, isn't it?
Beautifully constructed, though, further up, aren't they?
It's absolutely perfect. This is it. This is the start of Car's domain. This is actually a guard hut, and one man would be on guard in here 24 hours a day. And you can see even ancient pottery has been preserved at this site. That's 3,500 years old.
So this is like one of Car's empties. His empty
There you go,
beer
yes.
jar. And we know this is 18th dynasty, don't we? Because
We
the
do.
valley, this part of the valley, the West Valley, was only ever used for royal tombs in
In the
Car's
18th
day, wasn't
dynasty.
it? Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
The guards in these huts maintained a watchful eye over everything that went on in the valley.
What he was guarding against was obviously tomb robbery for the pre-existing tombs. But while the new king's tomb was under construction, the materials used in the construction of the tomb were also very valuable.
Metal.
Copper,
Yeah.
the copper chisels especially, the paints, the plaster, the oils for the lamps. This was all very valuable material.
Although deathly silent today, 3,500 years ago these walls would have reverberated with the sound of Car's construction teams.
There'd be the mallets hitting the chisels in the tomb. There'd be pounding of the people making the plaster, the mixing bowls for the paints. And there'd be the voice of the overseer telling people off or telling people to do this, to do that.
Building a tomb for the king was hazardous work, although not all the dangers are immediately obvious.
Apart from the normal hazards of hitting your hand with a mallet or getting cut with a chisel, falling off scaffolding, breaking legs, falling down the tomb. The other risk is because this is a wadi, it's a dry riverbed, there are flash floods now and again, and all this would come crashing down. And they would have to run.
During his lifetime, Car worked on 3 royal tombs, initially as a craftsman. These copper chisels found in his tomb were the tools of Car's trade. He then rose to become royal architect and the overseer responsible for the design and construction of at least 2 pharaohs' tombs. It was a task on which Egypt entirely depended, since each pharaoh must be able to reach the afterlife to ensure both their immortality and the well-being of their subjects. Build it correctly and all would be well. Fail, and Egypt would fail with it. So how did Car and his men actually undertake this most onerous of tasks?
I'll follow in your footsteps.
Right.
This is tomb KV25. Thought to have been started for Amenhotep III's son Akhenaten, it was left unfinished when Akhenaten suddenly moved his capital away from Thebes. It's as if the workmen only downed tools yesterday.
Nice. So you can see, Joe, the unfinished wall. It's been chiselled smooth, but it hasn't been plastered. And you can actually see the gouge marks of the chisels where they've gouged out the material.
What a treat to be able to see this kind of working surface.
As an architect, Car meticulously planned the tomb's layout using the ancient Egyptian unit of measurement, the cubit.
In modern terms, the cubit was roughly 52.5 centimetres long. And it is subdivided into what was called 7 palms, the palm of your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And on the end we have 4 fingers there.
Perfect.
Perfect. The way this would be used was marking out and measuring your way down the tomb. In fact, you can see the dots there where they've been marking out. You see? As they came down.
It corresponds exactly.
Indeed.
And it's so usable, look
So
at
simple.
that.
Elegant.
It is elegant, isn't it? And at the end of the day's work, Car could fold it up, pop it back in its leather carrying case and take it home.
Just imagine Carr and his team of 30 or 40 men toiling in this extreme heat and choking dust. And to light their way, all they had were these simple oil lamps.
I think being down here in the dark with a lamp like this really increases the respect I have for Carr and his workforce, that they were able to create such sublime monuments with such simple tools.
The evidence reveals Carr was highly respected in life. This beautiful object is a golden royal cubit. It was presented to Carr in recognition for his work for the pharaoh Amenhotep II.
It can only be equated to a kind of carriage clock or an engraved tankard that you're given for good service. And you can only imagine Carr's pride and joy at receiving such a mark of royal favour. And had the ancient Egyptians had a mantelpiece, this would have been on it. But I think the true value of this special cubit is the fact it's been personalised to such a great degree, and it actually sums up Carr in a single item. It's the tools of his trade, and yet it's been embellished. The inscriptions on this are wonderful. So many little details about Carr's career, about the fact he built a small shrine or temple, not even in Thebes, further north at a site called Hermopolis, so he was clearly active outside of Thebes. It's pretty hard to describe how it feels to hold something like this, that Carr, and probably Merritt, would have held quite a lot just to sort of marvel at it and congratulate themselves on being so high up in Pharaoh's favour. I love it. I absolutely love it.
With Carr's career on the rise, he and Merritt also started a family. Childbirth is a risky time in any woman's life, and certainly in ancient Egypt. Merritt would have sought help from Hathor, the pre-eminent goddess of motherhood.
All ancient Egyptian women wanted to be like Hathor. She's like a modern female celebrity that all women aspire to be. She had it all, and she was worshipped here.
This is the funerary temple of the great female pharaoh Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri. Situated just 2 miles from the village, it's located at the base of the very cliffs in which Hathor herself was believed to reside. But how might the goddess have touched Merritt's life?
These columns are each one topped with the image of the goddess herself, the face of a beautiful woman, but with cow's ears poking through the mass of hair to reflect the goddess's cow-like, docile, sweet nature. She's seen as an eternal mother figure that can nurture all those around her, who would then take care of your soul for eternity and allow you to be reborn each morning with the rising sun.
Ordinary people like Merritt could not enter the actual temples themselves. These were sacred places reserved for the clergy and the pharaohs. So Merritt would have turned to a more domestic form of worship.
Now this wonderful thing is an exact replica of a bowl found in the village, and it shows the double heads of the goddess Hathor. I think they very much regarded this as a potent talisman, almost like an amulet that they could have about the house to bring the beautiful face of Hathor into their daily lives. So whatever they put in it, be it food, beer, wine, even flowers, the contents would be almost sprinkled with a little bit of Hathor's magic.
Yet Hathor wasn't only the goddess of fertility and motherhood, she was also the deity of sexual pleasure. And the evidence suggests that enjoying sex was as important then as it is now.
This is a replica of a section of the so-called Turin erotic papyrus. What it shows are couples actively
very actively having sex. The men all appear quite rough and ready. Some have receding hairlines, stubble, pot bellies. Each one has an enormous phallus. As for the women, they're very beautiful, very agile. Each has got a very exquisite hairstyle, fronted by one of these fragrant lotus blossoms. And so there's this desire to almost tap into the erotic. These aren't kind of showing women as slabs of meat simply there for male pleasure, not at all. These are active women engaged in acts of pleasure, acts of love. They're using sex as a kind of form of leisure, of entertainment, as well as doing it, portraying it.
And while Hathor might have offered sexual inspiration, her presence was needed most during the dangerous time of pregnancy and childbirth. Women like Merit would have looked to her for protection. The outer precincts of the temple here at Deir el-Bahri were a focus for such worship. This faded scene is a rare representation of a pregnant woman, in this case the mother of the female pharaoh Hatshepsut.
There she is as the unborn fetus, and you can just make out the gentle swelling of her mother's abdomen here as the unborn Hatshepsut resides within the safety of her mother's body. When the archaeologists excavated all around here a century ago, they found such amazing things as baby clothes that had been specially made with an image of Hathor, almost like a post-it note to the goddess. These would be left here in the hope that these women could conceive.
Merit had 3 children that we know of, 2 sons and 1 daughter. Their images appear in Kara Merit's tomb chapel and on the painted boxes found in their tomb. With infant mortality as high as 50%, Merit would have needed all the help she could get. But the villagers didn't just turn to the gods. This is the Kahun Papyrus. It details the prescriptions and spells used to tackle illnesses suffered specifically by women.
Examination of a woman who is aching in her rear, her front and the calves of her thighs. You should say of it, it is discharges of the womb, and you should treat it with 1 measure of carob fruit, 1 measure of incense pellets, 1 unit of cow's milk, boil, cool, mix together and drink on 4 consecutive mornings. What they're trying to do is bring some sort of order, some form of understanding to a host of complex medical conditions. And in the root cause of many of the problems associated with women's illnesses is apparently a wandering womb, because the Egyptians thought that this part of the female anatomy wasn't fixed in situ, but would kind of wander all over the body.
This bizarre condition had an equally bizarre cure.
The woman would sort of stand over burning incense in the hope that the rising sweet smell of the fumes would encourage this wandering womb down into its proper place.
And while today this may seem rather strange, such a diagnosis and treatment may have had some positive effect.
Certainly to the woman in labour, to have a medical practitioner present reading out these medical prescriptions would have had an almost placebo-like effect. And I think that's the strength of documents like this, used in conjunction with all the amulets and all the magical spells that could be brought to bear by the village midwife. The recitation of texts like this would have brought a further layer of order to a very difficult and complex time in a woman's life.
Alongside raising her children, Merit would have been responsible for her home. She's likely to have been just as house-proud as you and me. Yet far from the monochrome beige we see today, the world of ancient Egypt was a riot of colour. The vestiges of this can still be seen, if you know where to look.
When we look up at the ceilings, the areas which have been sheltered from direct sunlight, the colours are absolutely superb. The condition, the brightness, the vivacity, they're sort of leaping out of the walls and ceilings right into our eyes.
And this temple, with its vibrant colour,
was created by the later pharaoh Ramses III.
The Egyptians were far from subtle in their use of paint. Primary colours, red, green, blue, all these amazing, vivid hues. And the blues and greens are particularly bright. This, of course, is more of a status marker for the king who commissioned such a brilliant piece of work, because blues and greens weren't naturally occurring pigments and had to be manufactured at great cost. And so this is a way for the monarch to say, look at me, look at the wealth I possess.
The effort and expense involved in producing such synthetic colours was way beyond the reach of most ordinary people. Instead, they used locally sourced materials, ones that could literally be picked up from the desert floor.
This rock in my hand is kind of like a colour box that brought ancient Egypt to life, because on one side we have the red iron oxide, on the other the yellow iron oxide, and so by splitting a rock like this into the component yellows and reds, you could crush these up, mix with water, and then apply to the desired surface. I think the best way to sort of try and reanimate these colours is probably to use that old standby, a little bit of spit. Always works. Rub the stone. It's very, very vivid. You can see the effect it has against white. So you have these two shades that for the ancient Egyptians really did reflect blood, life, vivacity, and then the yellow of the golden sun.
I want to see how villagers like Ka and Merritt used colour to decorate their homes. And I'm in luck, as here at the southern end of the village, a single precious clue remains.
Here it is. Now, if I lift this cloth, I'm going to see something I've waited a long time to see. And it's basically an original wall scene from an ancient Egyptian house. So here goes. Oh, wow. It's a phenomenal piece. The colours are so fresh. It's a glimpse into the sort of world of ancient Egyptian interior design. It's the lower half of a female musician, and she's playing a flute. She's got gold bracelets, gold anklets. But the most exciting thing are these two tattoos of the household god Bez. So evocative, so warm, so sumptuous in its lavish use of colour, and these fabulous, fabulous leaves. Heart-shaped, draping down the sides to sort of inject some much-needed vegetation, greenery into this sort of desert environment. It's an intriguing thought that here in the very village where the men who built and painted the royal tombs, would they have been commissioned by one of the housewives here to come and paint my house? Or did the women paint these images for themselves? It's something we'll never know, but I like to think that the lady of the house would have had a direct input into the kind of scene she wanted around her as she went about her daily chores with the kids and her friends and female relatives.
Such fragments from the past allow us to get closer to the real Ka and Merritt. In the case of Merritt, she seems to have been a loving wife and hard-working mother, a delicate and beautiful woman, the epitome of taste and style. But sadly, this is where Merritt's story ends, the evidence suggesting she died quite suddenly to leave her beloved Ka as a grieving widower. He even had to bury her in a coffin intended for him, for not only is it far too large for Merritt, the inscriptions name only Ka. Yet Merritt was immortalised in the tomb chapel she shared with Ka, located just yards from their village. And this is where Ka and their children would have come to bring regular offerings and to pay their respects.
It's such a privileged glimpse into their everyday life. We're amongst their family here, and that's what this whole tomb chapel chamber has all around it, this feeling of family, of closeness, of warmth, of love. What's interesting here is that Car and Merritt are shown several times, and yet the one constant child that's with them is their daughter, Merritt, named after her mother. And this is Merritt the mother, here, and this is Merritt the daughter, behind her. On the other wall we have the daughter, Merritt, who's leaning forward towards her father, Car, and she appears to be tying a necklace around his neck, or perhaps anointing him with perfume. I'd like to think that it was Merritt, the daughter, who cared for Car in his old age.
But what happened to Car, the proud and talented architect? These elegant walking sticks may suggest he lived on into old age, continuing to oversee the most important commission of his life. So I've come back to this remote part of the Valley of the Kings to find the final resting place of Amenhotep III. It was actually the third of the royal tombs that Car worked on, so it's so exciting to be going in here and following in Car's wonderful footsteps. My enthusiasm is well founded because the tomb, currently under restoration, has been closed for decades. Hardly anyone gets to see this.
This isn't very professional, is it? Oh, this is so beautiful. It literally has brought tears to my eyes. It is so stunning. The colours are fantastic. It's exquisite. It's Amenhotep III being received into the care of the gods of the underworld. And there's Anubis handing out the sign of life to Amenhotep. Just think, Car and his men designing these images, just putting the king's vision into practice, and just literally it's taken my breath away. Look, the artist doesn't just come along with his blue paint and the palette and boshed on the paint. Somebody's taken the trouble to apply individual curls of hair here. Can you see the texture? The curls here. That's textured hair. And there also Amenhotep with Osiris, green-faced god of vegetation, new life and resurrection. And that's really what this tomb does. It's a time machine. It's the place where Amenhotep III's mummy would have finally been laid to rest.
You can clearly see that no expense was spared, and for good reason. For this is where the pharaoh, then revered as a god, would dwell in the afterlife, his next seat of power.
Oh, and down we go, deeper and deeper, into the underworld. Wow. It really does evoke this sense of going down into the subterranean underworld, into the blackness, into the darkness, into eternity.
This elaborate network of chambers and stairways was designed to protect the royal mummy and all the glittering treasures which once surrounded it.
Now look at this very clever trick of the architect, our boy Car. Look at this. Can you see the way the images were once all along this wall, just the whole way around, images of the king and the gods, and yet originally this would have been packed with mud brick, probably, plastered over, the images drawn and painted over it, so that any would-be tomb robbers would come down here, think, oh, this is it, nothing much in here,
and hopefully leave by the way they came in, because this is actually the next stage of the tomb, so it's kind of like a hidden portal.
This is the burial chamber, the most important part of the tomb. And there it is, the final resting place of one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. A man considered a god, both in life and in death.
How do you bury a god? Well, obviously it's surrounded, dripping in gold, semi-precious stones and the most beautiful funerary items, all of which would have been choreographed, planned by Ka and his colleagues. Everybody wants to take care of the king. Within the royal mummy dwelt the soul, the immortal soul of Egypt itself, this cumulative build-up of every royal pharaoh who'd gone before, resided within the mummy who once lay down there. Wow. It's been 46 years waiting to see this tomb, and it's been well worth it.
Although we can now appreciate his consummate workmanship, it seems Ka himself never saw the finished tomb, for he died before his king. But like his king, Ka's own body was prepared for its eternal journey into the afterlife before he too was buried. Since this journey has given us a chance to get that little bit closer to Ka and Merritt, I think we could almost call them friends. Their worries and concerns are not unlike our own. Hard work, family, and above all, love. Yet this is only the beginning of their story. What comes next is a journey into a world very different from our own. A world of ritual, of magic, and the unswerving belief that life really can go on forever.
And here we have Ka's name, right down the middle. And to speak the name of the dead is to make them live again. Ka and Merritt.
So join me next time as we travel deep into the heart of the Egyptian afterlife. It's an extraordinary journey on which we uncover Ka and Merritt's costly preparations for death, all played out in a series of complex and elaborate rituals as they attempt to achieve their place in eternity.